KMP6 exam prep step by step, day 7, Thursday, July 12, 2018. We have started integration project management in our last session. Today we'll continue with that and look at the remainder of the processes. In our last session, we touched upon develop project charter, develop project plan, and then these are the two processes we did in our last session. Today, we'll start with direct and manage project work. If you remember, what we talked about in case of integration management is, it is about integrating all the work across different processes. So direct and managed project work, as we have seen in the process table, it is in the executing process group. In other words, what we're saying is, with this process, we are actually executing the project, and our role as project manager is to direct and manage that work during the execution process. And in the process, because it is an integration, like we said, it is an integration management, we will bring together all the different processes in the executing process group across the knowledge area. For example, develop team, manage team, implement risk. These are some of the processes we will bring together as we are directing and managing project work. So let's take a look and overview. What we'll actually do in these processes, we'll be executing, and we will be executing in accordance with the plan. We have already done the project plan, and in this process, we'll be doing the execution in accordance with the plan that we have drawn. As we have said, during this process, we'll coordinate across knowledge areas in the process group as we execute the project. And one thing to remember is, this execution will depend on the application area. So in other words, the execution of the project will look very different as we move from one application to another application area. For example, a project execution in IT will be very different from an execution of project in construction, and very different from execution of project in pharmaceutical. So these projects will look very different as we execute from knowledge area to knowledge area. Direct and managed project work, when we look at this process, the inputs are project management plan, project documents, approved requests, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational processes. Tools will be expert judgment, project management information system, meetings, and then outputs that will have is deliverables, work performance data, issue log, change request, and so on. Direct and managed project work, as we are directing this work by consolidating all the process in the knowledge area, we will be involved in certain activities. One is, we'll allocate available resource. As you can imagine, when we are directing and managing project work, we are going to need resources, and we will see what are the resources available and that we have already planned for, and we allocate those resources as we start execution. These resources, with the help of these resources, we will start on execution based on planned activities. So we have made plans, and in the plan we have said this particular resource will do this activity, this particular resource will do this activity, and we will start with that plan that we made. As we are going through the execution, we will constantly look at the performance in terms of, are we going according to the plan, or is there any deviation that is happening? And then as we are doing the execution or directing and managing project work, there will be changes that will come about, and we will have to manage those changes. As we are doing these activities, and through these activities, we will be creating deliverables that we are expected to in this project as we are planned, and what our stakeholders and customers are expecting from us. And all this that we're doing, like we said a little while back, it will depend on the application area, and what we do and how we do it. All these activities will differ from application area to application area. Now, as we go through different processes, we will find we have to do so many different activities. We'll have to track the plan, we have to track the schedule, there will be changes, we'll have to manage the configuration, and so on and so forth. Now, when we are doing that, we cannot humanly do everything manually or very crude way of doing it, or compiling and things like that. All these activities will be supported in the real world, will be supported by some system, some information system. And all this information together becomes, or what is the Project Management Information System, or PMIS. This is what we call as PMIS. When we come across this term again later on in other processes. So let's see what all are included in the PMIS, or Project Management Information System. Having said that, please note this is not an exhaustive list. There can be others than what we are discussing here. One is the scheduling software. We will schedule the activities along with who is doing what, and we'll use the scheduling software to track the project. For example, Microsoft Project, and there will be others as well. Then we'll have configuration management system. We want to maintain the features and functions of the deliverables, along with some documents as well. And we want to maintain as it keeps on changing through the project, and new things are being developed, new items or new deliverables, new components are being delivered. And so we have to maintain that, and we use it, use a configuration management system to maintain those features and functions of the system, as well as the documentation. In change management system, there will be so much of change that comes along, and we have to ensure that we do it right, we do it comprehensively, and for that, we will use a system which is change management system. So we'll, in the process, we look at the flow of the change, and then we'll realize that how valuable this change management system is. Then information collection and distribution system. There will be a lot of information that we'll collect through the process. And this again will have to be distributed to different stakeholders. For example, the work performance. And this information will collect and we'll have to distribute to the stakeholders so they know where we are at any point of time. So this again will use some system to actually go through that process. Then there will be some corporate knowledge-based repository. What we learn, we'll have to store it. And again, we will use the knowledge that was stored by previous projects. So all these things will be done by using a repository system or corporate knowledge base, and it can be, this kind of system can be different in different organizations. All these together become PMIS, but again, there can be others. For example, work authorization system that really where who is doing what work, when they have started. This will come in the work authorization system. That again is part of PMIS. So these are some of the system in the PMIS, and this is a name. That we use PMIS, a project management information system, and there can be other systems as well besides this. The change request is something that will come about when we are executing a project. Like we said, change is inevitable in a project, and requests for change will come. So what comes about in the change request? One is corrective action. Now, corrective action is really the intentional activity that realigns project performance with the plan. In other words, we are trying to correct our course of action because we have realized there is some deviation from our plan. Now, when we say performance, we are correcting some action or realigning project performance, it can be schedule, it can be cost, or it can be scope. For example, if our project is delayed, so we will take some corrective action so that it comes back on track, and with the plan, it comes the gap between actual and plan gets narrowed. Or it can be in terms of scope. Maybe we have not, we have missed out some requirements that has not been taken into account as we are designing, and as we are going into, suddenly we realize that, and so we make a corrective action, include that requirements that we missed out, and so on and so forth. So it can be in different areas, but the essential thing is we found out there is a realignment required for the project performance, and this is what we'll be doing in corrective action. Then there is this preventive action. Preventive action ensures future performance is aligned to plan. So as we are executing, we realize that if we don't do this particular thing, then there might be some deviation how we are performing, some deviation when compared to the plan. So some of the preventive actions are training, for example. If we realize that there are areas where my team needs training, and if I don't train them, the team, it might so happen that as we move along, I'll find that the project is getting delayed, and even the quality that I'm providing is not up to the mark. So I might go ahead and train my team, and that is a preventive action. Or providing or ensuring that we have sound documentation in the project. That is also a preventive action. So there can be different preventive action that we take to ensure that the future performance is aligned to the plan. Then there is this defect repair. Defect repair is about something we have done and we find now that it is not conforming to the plan. Let's say we are going about building a hotel, and then it was found that the walls that were painted, the color is not according to what was planned and committed to our customer. Now, when that happens, that's a defect. We need to repair. So what we'll do, we'll again go ahead and paint that, do the painting based on what we have put down in our scope and in our requirements plan. Defect repair validation. Now, once this is done, once a defect is repaired, we validate. And that's called validation of defect repair. So for example, in this particular case, someone will come and compare and make sure that the new painting that is done is according to what has been in the requirements document. And then finally, there will be updates. There will be a lot of updates with the changes, because when change comes and we do take some kind of action or repair the defect, there will be corresponding changes that needs to be done in the control plans and documents. And so, and that is really the update. So because let's say, as an example, what we gave, we found one requirement is missing, for example, and then we put the requirement, and then whatever documents has to be updated because of this will be updated. Maybe it's a scheduled document because there's been an impact in the schedule, or maybe in the requirements document because we have actually implemented a little differently than what was there in the requirements document. So these control plans and documents will have to be updated when we go through changes. Outputs for direct and managed project work. Outputs that comes about are deliverables, of course, because what we are really doing here is we are executing the project, and so we are actually creating deliverables, and deliverables is an output. Work performance data, we'll talk about it a little more in later in another process, but these are the data that we'll collect as we are going through the execution of the project. For example, how much time something has taken, when it has ended, and so on and so forth. How many errors we found during testing, and those are really the performance data that we will collect as we are moving through, and and this will also be the output. Then issue log. Issue log will also be an output where we will log all the issues. Like what are the issues, who has raised it, when was it raised, who is addressing it, what is the status, when it is will be completed, and so on. So we will keep that log of the issue, and as we said, change request is also something that will come about from this direct and managed project work, and some updates, project management plan updates, project document updates. These are things that will come about as output. And of course, the OPA, Organization Process Assets. Our next process is manage project knowledge. Now, manage project knowledge is a new process that has come about in the 6th edition. PMI now recognizes that project knowledge is not just about the learned database in the OPA. It's more than that. And we have to actively manage that knowledge. Overview. The idea behind managed project knowledge is to use existing knowledge and create new knowledge. In other words, we leverage organizational knowledge to improve outcome all through. In other, our project improves will improve because of the knowledge that is there, and we can use those existing knowledge from previous projects, and at the same time we will create knowledge, organization knowledge, so that future projects can benefit from our experience. Now, one thing to understand here is there are two kinds of knowledge: explicit and tacit knowledge. Now, knowledge, typically, most organization, the way they look at it, they talk about it, they'll talk about explicit knowledge. But when we are in this particular process, we will take into account both explicit and tacit knowledge. Now, explicit knowledge are those knowledge that can be codified in the sense that we can document it, maybe as part of the description, maybe in numbers, and in some form, or maybe in pictures. So we can document those knowledge, and these are explicit knowledge. They can be codified in some way or other. As opposed to explicit knowledge, there is tacit knowledge, which is very personal and sometimes very difficult to express. It comes about through the experience people have. And oftentimes it is not documented, and sometimes it cannot be easily documented. And even if it is documented, it loses its context and it loses its value. It is no more what it is originally, how it is originally resided within as an insight with someone. And once it is codified, sometimes it gets, it loses its original insight, and it might be interpreted differently by different people. So these are tacit knowledge. As a process, managed project knowledge will have inputs like plan, documents, deliverables, EEF, OPA, and the tools that we'll be using are expert judgment, knowledge judgment, information management, team skills, and interpersonal skills. And finally, the output that we'll get are lessons learned, registered, project management plan updates, and OPA updates. Now, managing project knowledge, what it involves are, we are looking at project knowledge, and we said there are two forms of knowledge. One is explicit knowledge and another is tacit knowledge. The explicit knowledge is being dealt through what we call information management. What we have here is the information management. It comprises of codifying activity. So we'll use some codifying method, maybe picture, maybe describing that information. Maybe it is through the numbers, some formula, whatever it is. So we are able to codify that. Or it can be in the lessons learned register, or we can use library service or some information gathering systems probably that we use to actually capture those knowledge from wherever it is. And we of course use different systems within the project management information system. So all this will be involved or can be involved in actually managing information or doing the information management. And these were explicit knowledge, and it can be documented, it can be codified, and so we are able to do that. Having said that, we cannot capture the same way what is the tacit knowledge. But in this managing project knowledge, we recognize that it is not enough to just capture, use, and store only the explicit knowledge. There are more to it than that. And how we deal with tacit knowledge? We deal with tacit knowledge by way of knowledge management, as we call them in the PMP term. And these are things like networking, or formal and informal networking. So when we're networking, you are talking to someone, and the way they describe what they describe through repeated interaction, we can to some extent get the knowledge from them. So, and there are some other techniques like meetings. Then we might be doing some work shadowing or reverse shadowing. Work shadowing is when someone comes in and wants to understand a process, they just observe the person who is working, or even take part in that process. So this is work shadowing. As opposed to that, reverse shadowing is the person who is learning, an experienced person will actually observe that person and keep on correcting them as or this person is doing it. This is called reverse shadowing. Then there might be some events when knowledge is shared between different groups, or in the same group, different persons. So through events, there can be some knowledge sharing, and we see that all the time. For example, seminars, conferences, and so on and so forth. And then workshops. We can conduct workshops. There can be discussion forums, and there can be trainings. So these can help us with the knowledge management and capture, reuse tacit knowledge. Outputs from this particular process, which is the managed project knowledge, is lessons learned register that we talked about, project management plan updates, OP updates. So this is where finally whatever we capture, we store in these different areas, in these different forms. Our next process is monitoring and control project work. Now, I have said this before. When we are a project manager, when I'm a project manager in a particular project, we have to wear two hats at the same time. One is the execution hat, and another is the monitoring and controlling hat. So what we'll be doing in this case is, as we are executing, as we are directing and managing work, project work, we side by side will also monitor what we're doing and see, are we going according to the plan? So this is what is a monitor and control project work, and we'll be doing that. An overview, what we'll be doing, as you said, we'll be continuously monitor gap between plan and actual. We have made a plan, and as we are executing, we'll keep on analyzing or monitoring what is the gap between the plan and what we're doing. For example, I have a schedule plan, and if continuously I'll see, for example, today I'll see how much I should have finished and how much I have finished. So I am monitoring the gap between the schedule plan and the actual. Then we have said before again, monitoring and controlling project work has to be done throughout the project from beginning to end. And we have seen, this particular process group encompasses all the other processes, because we have to always keep monitoring where we are at one point of time. And when we're doing that, it helps in alerting early action very good. For example, if you don't continuously monitor, what we'll find is after some time, when we realize, there is some problem, and it might be too late or it might be too costly, and so it alerts by continuously monitoring. It helps us in alerting early action very good. Monitoring and control project work, the inputs that we feed into this particular process are project management plan, project documents, work performance info, agreements, and so on. And the tools will use data analysis, decision making, and so on, and then finally the outputs. Now, what all is involved in monitoring and controlling project work? First and foremost, as you have said, we'll compare actual performance against plan. And when we say actual performance, it might be scope, it might be schedule, it might be cost. And when we do this comparison and we monitor this gap, we might come about some action needs to be taken. Some of them might be corrective action because we realize now that there is a deviation from the plan. Or some might be preventive action because we realize that if we don't take certain steps now, it might affect us later on down the line. So we might take some preventive action. We'll also look at the risk. We'll talk about the risk in much more detail, how we identify, track, and respond to risk. But then we do this through and through the project because as we're executing, new risks might come, and this risk some new risk might come that we need to identify, or we might have to respond. So we'll have to keep an eye on risk as we are executing our project. And the information, lot of information that will come about during execution, we have to maintain them in the information base in a timely manner. For example, what we have achieved today, or how much we have progressed, what are the items that got completed. All this needs to be recorded immediately. We cannot delay, say, okay, this information will be inserted into the base, the information base later on. We have to always keep it current. Because nowadays also, many of these things, as you put it, and it is immediately visible through some kind of reports to our stakeholders. So when you are putting in timely information, the consumer of this information will get accurate information or accurate status in a timely manner. Now, providing information and in this monitoring and controlling project work, we'll also provide information for status reporting, progress measurement, and also we'll do a lot of forecasting. Now, let's look at this. And we'll talk about this forecasting in much more detail later on in another process. But let's look at what we really mean by that and why. Now, let's say we have got delayed. And we have got delayed based on the plan. So we'll report this, of course. And our user, consumer, or sponsor will see that there is a delay. So the next question they'll ask, okay, you have got delayed by 15 days. Now, what does this mean to the whole project? Because they would be interested in the final thing that is happening. When they are going to get the product, how much it is going to cost, and so on and so forth. So with the information that you have, you need to forecast, saying that, hey, okay, and there are methods we'll talk about. We'll focus and say, okay, this is when I'm finishing. Similarly for cost, maybe we have overspent by $50,000. Now the question that will arise from the user is, so okay, you have already spent $50,000 in access, so what does this mean to the total cost of my project? So these are some focusing that we'll be doing as you move through the project. Then there'll be changes and that will come about, and when the changes that come about and you implement the changes, you will monitor those implementation to make sure the changes are done the way it has been asked for, and so on. And finally, there will be a continuous progress and status reporting to program management or PMO office and senior management and so on and so forth. We will get involved in a lot of data analysis during monitoring and controlling project work. Some of the data analysis that we'll do is alternative analysis. For example, let's say we need some new functions, and then we might do some alternatives. So this function can be done this way or that way, and so which is the right way to do it, and so on and so forth. Cost benefit analysis. Cost benefit analysis we have looked at when we started the project, but it can also happen as we are executing the project. For example, some new features might have to be added, and we might want to do a cost benefit analysis. So what is the cost? What kind of benefit you are getting? Is it really worth it, including that particular function? Then earned value analysis. Through earned value analysis, what we're going to do is we'll find out the variance, we'll find out the focus, and so on. And this is something we'll go into much more detail in our next process, which is a scope management. Root cause analysis. A lot of times what happens, we see a problem. When you find a problem, what we find in the problem is just the symptom. It is not the underlying cause. So sometimes we have to go multiple level below to really find the root cause. Because unless you attack the root cause, you will encounter this problem even though you thought you have solved the problem. So sometimes you have to go multiple levels to really determine what is the root cause. So can be doing root cause analysis. Trend analysis is another analysis that can come handy when we are monitoring and controlling project work. For example, let's say there is some variance, or we have got delayed by some days in our project. So what we want to do is now we want to see the trend and take the historical data and see that this delay, has it become sudden or it has been gradually happening? If it is gradually happening, then probably there is a systemic error in the way we planned it or we put down the schedule. And if it has become sudden, then it is, and if it is a systemic thing, that we might think of updating the plan because this is going to go because, and we have to correct the plan. And if there is a one-off thing that we see and it is not a systemic delay, then maybe we'll take some other action. So trend analysis can be very useful to determine what action we should take. And finally, variance analysis is about seeing where we are compared to what we have planned. Now, work performance data. Now, as we are doing the execution, there will be a lot of performance data that come about. And it transforms, this performance data transforms as it moves through, as it is shaped up to provide different use, as it is put to use, let me put it that way. So let's see how it transforms and what it is about. Now, first thing is the work performance data. we call it work performance data. These are really the raw data. For example, what is the percentage work that has been completed? Or what is the finish date for this activity? And how much time it is taken for this activity? How many errors we have found? So these are raw data that come about when we're executing, and this is called work performance data. And when you take this data and we do some kind of analysis, you get what is called work performance information. For example, from this percentage of work completed, you might find what is the focus, when will we finish this particular module. And in terms of when we see where we are, we might say, okay, these are the status. So from this raw data, we will analyze and make what is information that we can talk about and we can use to respond to queries from stakeholders. Now, this information can be taken further, and this information we take further and have what is called work performance reports. This can be memos, it can be in the dashboard. This is a representation of the information that we share with different stakeholders. And it can be in different forms. It can be in physical, it can be electronic forms, and so on. So the work performance data becomes work performance information upon analysis, and then that is taken forward to generate reports for the stakeholders. Outputs from this particular process, we have work performance reports, as we have seen, then change request, because change request comes about from this particular process, project management plan updates, and there are different document updates, a cost focused. Then issue log we talked about, lessons learned register, risk register, because we are identifying, tracking, and responding to risk, and then schedule focus. So these are things that come about from monitoring and controlling project work. Now let's move on to our next process, which is perform integrated change control. Perform integrated change control is about changes, because changes is inevitable in any project. As you are going through execution, or even when you are designing, when you are planning, changes will keep on coming on the project. And how you change, how you handle those change matters. And so or in other words, we have to take these changes and implement them in a very controlled fashion. This is what is integrated change control. A seemingly small change may cause ripple effect on scope across the project. For example, we might at the first sight think a small change is a small change that has come about. But then when you analyze a lot of time, you'll see it has repercussions across the project. And also, a lot of times, if we don't address change that has come about and we delay in addressing this change, that can have what you call expanding effect as you move forward, because with the delay, it might have an impact on many other areas. And that's why we need prompt action. Because when a change comes about, change is identified, we have to immediately take it into consideration, discuss and analyze, and then we can probably decide, well, we now know what sort of impact this might have, and then can decide, well, then we can do now or we can do after 15 days or whatever. But we have to take prompt action when change comes. And as we have said, before the implementation, there has to be some study, some analysis that needs to be done on this change. What kind of impact is there? And then only we go with the implementation. One thing we have to remember, there cannot be any unapproved changes. For example, if a stakeholder comes and tells, hey, I need this, can you quickly do it? And if not you, then some of your uh, team member, by virtue of their helpful nature, it's okay, don't worry, I'll do it just now, without even telling you. And that is not something that is acceptable when you are managing a project. There cannot be any unapproved changes, and any change that comes in has to go through the change control procedure before you can implement the change. And when you're doing the changes, it should be communicated appropriately with stakeholders. Because, and it doesn't matter, it might be approval, it might be rejection, and when you are approving and when you are implementing, all this communication has to go to the stakeholders, because they should be in loop, they should understand what is happening on that front. And a change, especially the scope change, is likely to impact different project management areas. For example, it might impact the schedule, it might impact the cost, it might impact the quality, it might impact the risk. So we have to do a thorough analysis before we go ahead and implement a change. Perform integrated control change management. Inputs will see we have the change request is a key input, and of course there are plans and project documents and work performance reports. The tools are primarily the change control tools, and there will be some data analysis, decision making, and of course after we go through that process, we will have approved change request. And this approved change request is taken in the direct and manage work to actually implement the change. Perform integrated change control is conducted from inception through completion, because change can come at any point, and that is something that we have to keep in mind. It is not just during execution, it can come before as well. Even when you are doing requirement study, there can be changes that comes about. And the change responsibility typically lies with the project manager. A project manager typically will determine if a project or if a change has to be is approved or rejected, and this will of course done through discussion with the team, but finally the responsibility lies with the project manager. And how we manage this change control and what kind of level of control we put in or establish to manage the changes really depends on size and complexity of the project. If it is a large project, will typically have an elaborate level of control. But if it is small project, then maybe one person will have the control. It may impact scope, plan, or documents. So it's not just about changes to your scope or requirements. It can be about the plan or documents and even the contracts that we'll have with vendors. Now, if there are baseline documents, if you remember, we talked about 3 baselines: scope, plan, scope, schedule, and cost. All these baseline documents will also go through change control process. You cannot change a baseline document without taking it through the change control process And of course, after it's approved, even the sponsor or the appropriate authority will approve the change, and which might become the new baseline. Now, approval or rejection of changes has to be done by some responsible individual, and typically it is project manager. But sometimes it might be a project sponsor as well. For example, in the functional organization we talked about, where functional manager is really drives the project, and the functional manager might be the project sponsor. In which case it might be the project sponsor who is actually responsible for the approving or rejecting changes. And sometimes we let the project sponsor do it because they might have a handle on from the business perspective which particular feature is worth bringing it in and which is not, and so on. But who makes this or who is responsible will be laid out in the plan. And as we have said, when we are drawing the plan is a project plan is our reference documentation, and it is based on what we put out in the plan. That person will be responsible for approving or rejecting changes. Now, there are certain change control tools that we'll use in the process. One is what we said, configuration management. Configuration management is where we identify what are the things that we need to keep track of or when it changes. And they're typically the features and functions and components of the deliverables and the deliverables, so that when we are put it in the configuration management system, if it changes, we'll put the changes in. So at any point of time, we know which are the items that got changed, at what point it got changed, and what is the final thing that we have. And along with that, there can also be some documents. So all these items, what we call them configuration item. And the first step is to really find out what are, or identify what are the configuration items that should go into the project in configuration management. And then when we do that and we keep on maintaining, we'll always record that and as it moves, and also we report the status every now and then to make sure that we are managing these configuration items correctly in a way that it is not out of sync. And very often there might be some configuration item verification and audit, so that we want to ensure that it doesn't go, something doesn't go missing in the configuration management database. Then we have the change management. Change management is where changes comes in and how we take it through, and we use certain tools for this. For example, the first step will be identifying changes, and then when it is identified in that particular change management through the change management tool, we'll document what are the in details, what are the changes, and so on. And then after documentation, we will discuss maybe through a change control board and decide what changes needs to be done, and should it be done, should it not be done. And then once we decide that it is approved that we have to make the changes, then we'll keep track of those changes until it is implemented, this change is implemented. Now, during the change management, we'll also go through different decision making. For example, we might sit together as a group or the change control board, and we want to decide that, okay, there are different viewpoints we have on these changes. Should we go ahead or not? And we might, as a group, want to decide. And so there are different ways of decision. One is by voting. Now, when you do voting, it can be different types of voting. One is unanimity, saying that only if everyone agrees, we'll take this forward. Otherwise, we'll drop this and reject this particular change. Sometimes we might go with the majority and say that if 50%, more than 50% of the voting participants agree, then we go and implement the change. Otherwise, we don't. Or plurality, saying that the biggest group there might be multiple viewpoints, and we'll take that particular change where the biggest group have agreed within the voting participants, and it need not be a majority, it might be more than 50%. So that's plurality. Another way of making decision is autocratic. Autocratic is, let's say you as a project manager, you say, hey, okay, I understand everything. Now I've decided this is the way to go. So essentially, you are the sole decision maker. You are probably taking input from others, but this is something called autocratic. And then finally, multi-criteria decision analysis. This is where you make a more complex decision that involves multiple criteria, and there are different options and so on. So you use this multi-criteria decision analysis, and in a later process, we'll go more into this particular decision analysis, which is multi-criteria decision analysis. Now, when it comes to change management, there are certain red flags we should be aware of. One is inadequate documentation. If documentation is inadequate, that's a red flag, because it is going to give rise to many problems later on. For example, someone going to make a change will get lost where it was left before, or how it was actually implemented, because there was not enough documentation how it was implemented. And if that person goes in to make changes, they might make changes at incorrect places. Unapproved changes. If there are changes that has gone in and which is not approved, that's a very dangerous red flag. Scope creep. Scope creep is where there has been a small amount of new scope or new functionality that crept in, and without going through the change control procedure, and we have taken the scope changes, but then it didn't get reflected in other areas, like, let's say, cost or schedule and so on and so forth. And essentially, this has gone through without proper change control management. Now, gold plating on the surface, it looks to be a good thing, but it is actually not. It is about providing functionality, additional functionality, without approval from the stakeholder or the user. So let me give an example. Let's say we are doing a project and it was supposed to get over in 1 year, and the cost is 150,000. And we have finished this project in 10 months, and there's still some 30,000 left. And we think that, hey, we still have money left, we have time left. Why don't we put some additional features which will make the user happy? and they'll be pleasantly surprised to find these new features. So that's what we think, and we spend, and we go to the user and say, hey, we have put all these different features for you, though you didn't ask us to. Now, on the surface, this might sound good, but it is not. This is called gold plating, and it is something that we should avoid. Instead, what we should do is we should go back to the user and say, hey, we have finished before time, and there's still some money left. So if you really want, we can add new features. We can change our plan and make a new plan and add these features and so on. But we should never introduce changes without first discussing with the user and do a proper change control, integrated change control procedure. Now, integrated change control, let's look at the flow. This is how it goes about. Proposed changes. Changes comes in, changes are proposed, and then when it is proposed, it gets into the project management information system. We talked about change management, change control tool and all that. So one of the project management information system. And in fact, there can be multiple systems that will get affected by this integrated change control. So it can, and then this change may go and impact scope change control system, schedule change control system, cost change control system, and contract change control system. Because a change can impact any of them. Now, if it goes to the scope, then it will have an impact on configuration management system. So we have to get into configuration management system, see what configuration items are getting affected and so on. And of course, it will any change to scope will get into the integrated change control, schedule. If there's a change in the schedule, it go into the integrated change control and as well as the contract. Now, in the integrated change control, what happens is there will be probably discussion. Probably a change control board will come together and decide, is it worth it? What is the impact? What are the different areas that will get affected? And then finally take a call to approve or reject. If it is rejected, it is stored back into the project information system with the status that it is rejected, and then communicated to all the other stakeholders. If it is approved, we will start looking at what are the changes that is going into the product scope, what is the changes what is the impact on the project scope. We'll make changes to WBS and WBS dictionary. These are things that we'll talk about later on, and then the project plan. And so this is really the flow behind the integrated change control. The last process in the integration management knowledge area we'll talk about is close project or phase. And that this also talks about the contract. The overview. In this close phase or project or phase of contract, we deal with all kind of closing that we need to do, and it takes place, all this this process takes place when we are closing a project, closing a phase, or closing a contract. And sometimes you'll find it is not always a happy ending. The project might not be successful and it is terminal, or for some reason it is terminated early. So if they are terminated early, we'll have to take special action in such this thing. And this will also deal with formal closing. We'll formally close the project through this process. Inputs Of course, for example, project charter, there might be many things we have to ensure that we're covering there. Accepted deliverables only after the deliverables are accepted. That's when we actually, will go into the closing phase, and there might be some agreements and procurement documentation, project documents. We'll take all these as the input and go through the closing in the process, which will involve about meetings, lots of meetings, data analysis, expert judgment, and finally, the key output will be the transition or the final product that we're delivering, and along with that, there will be some final report or project documents update. Let's look at what are the activities. The first is we are saying that we want to satisfy the exit criteria. We want to ensure that we are satisfying exit criteria, and in this activity, we will do all these kind of tasks. For example, we'll ensure all the documents are up to date. We'll confirm acceptance by customer. We have delivered something, and we will have to have formal acceptance by customer that we have delivered to their expectation or what they wanted, and if there is any difference, that's documented, and so on and so forth. And then we have to ensure that all costs are charged to the project, because once the project is closed, costs cannot be charged, and there can be issues because of that. We'll close all the project accounts, and if there are personnel still assigned to this project, we have to relieve them, and they get reassigned to another project or another department. And if there are some facilities that we have taken that is there within, we have to again release those. For example, there are computers or some space that is allocated to this particular project that has to be released so that it can be used by some other projects and other parts of the organization, and it is not being unused. In contractual agreements, we will confirm acceptance of seller's work and finalize open claims. Open claims are, there might be some pending claims that might be there, pending claims by the seller, so we'll have to close that. And sometimes it might be a regular claim, sometimes it might be because of some kind of dispute, and we have to resolve that and finalize those claims. And we have to update our records with final results and archive all this information. And then there are some other activities, for example, audit related. There might be knowledge transfer from, let's say, the project team to the maintenance team, or our project team to the operations team. These are some knowledge transfer that will take place. We'll archive all the lessons that is learned, and we might, if it is going to the next phase, then we have to transfer our outcome, what we have, to the next phase. Let's say from design to construction it is going. So the design document is handed over to the phase, construction phase. Or if the project is over, it is going to production, then we hand it over to the operations. Then during this, we might find that some changes to policies and procedures are required. If you remember early on, we talked about that policies and procedures project team cannot do. Only the lessons learned is what project team can update. But what we can do is we can submit those changes or suggest those changes to appropriate authority who is handling those policies and procedures. And finally, we will try to get feedback from the stakeholders and measure to see how we have performed as a project. Outputs, project document updates, of course, and final transition. And of course, with the final transition, meaning when is the final transition, essentially delivering the product to the operations team or the next phase, as we have said, and then final report. In the final report, there will be a summary page who wants to look at the summary level, and then there will be some scope, schedule, cost, objective that was there in the plan and how we have met them, what's the variance, and then, of course, a validation summary that they validated, tested the product during the acceptance process. And of course, we'll also update the organization processes. And so the next module is the project scope management, which we'll take up tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you for being with me. And I'll talk to you tomorrow, same time.